Chapter 2, Dishes and Homework. Not in a million years, Kenny's mom said. She then blew on her spoonful of soup and sipped it up. But Mom, it's a dragon. I want to go see it before anybody else does. Who knows what that thing could do to you? You could get bit or scratched up, and it's probably carrying all kinds of diseases. Right, Pa? As usual, Kenny's father was much calmer now that he had eaten, and Kenny studied him as he started on his third bowl of chowder. The dainty wooden soup spoon looked odd, held in his rugged, worn paws. In fact, the lad half waited for his father to lift the bowl up and slurp the remainder of the chowder. Instead, he calmly said, "If Kit thinks he can handle the likes of a dragon, then I think we should let him. After all," he continued, winking at his son, "he ain't no little bunny any more." His mom folded her napkin and set it on the table. She sighed. "All right, but not until you finish the dishes and your homework." "Aw, I can do those later. Let me go now. Please." "Dishes and homework first," she repeated as she pointed at him with her spoon. Kenny cleared the table and cleaned the dishes in record time. As he finished drying the last of the soup bowls, he watched the sun sink lower and lower into the darkening sky. When he was finished, he ran into his room and dumped his book bag upside down onto his bed. Textbooks spilled out, pencils rolled off onto the floor, and loose papers scattered like white leaves. Kenny shuffled through it all and picked up Stars and Their Constellations, the book he was supposed to do a book report on. It was his last assignment for the school year, and it would be an easy one for him, as he'd read the astronomy text front to back several times already. Now he simply needed to write the report. Or, he thought, with a little persuasion on my teacher, Mrs. Skunkmeyer, I could do an oral report instead, and I won't have to write anything. So technically, I'd be finished with my homework. However, an oral book report meant going in front of the class and talking. The last time Kenny had done that, it was on the topic of the migration of the ruby-throated hummingbird for his science class, and it hadn't gone so well. One of his classmates had started snoring loudly, and another hooted, "Snoring, boring," bringing snickers to the entire room as Kenny tried to give his presentation. The other kids just didn't get excited about stuff that he did. But honestly, who wouldn't be fascinated by the idea of a tiny bird flying all over the world by itself? If a little hummingbird could do that, well then... He paused in his thoughts, for there on the bookshelf, next to his copy of Amazing Hummingbird Stories, was an old bestiary that he had borrowed from his friend George. He grabbed the leather-bound tome and he opened it up. It smelled musty and old, and in one whiff, Kenny was back in George's dim bookshop, in a beat-up armchair, surrounded by stacks of books. Even though the shop appeared messy, it was quite organized. Yet only George knew where everything was, as he hardly ever left his little literary sanctuary. When Kenny would visit, the retiree would always recount a story about his past adventures, usually over a game of chess, and he had plenty of new and interesting books to show. Many times he would let Kenny borrow books from the store, as long as he took good care of them and returned them in their brand new condition once he was finished. Sometimes he'd just let Kenny keep them as a gift. Kenny flipped through the yellowed pages of the bestiary. Albatross, bear, chimera, dragon, he said aloud. Kenny hadn't finished this book yet and had read only some of the entries. The illustration for the dragon showed a vicious, sinewy, coiled monster belching white-hot flames. An actual dragon, the young rabbit said to himself. It's like seeing a living dinosaur. Imagine bringing him to class for the science fair. He turned the page, and there were more pictures. One was of an armored knight fighting a dragon. In one hand, the knight held a shield, in the other, a long lance, and with which he was pinning the reptilian beast down to the blackened, scorched earth. Fallen knights littered the background. A little gear in Kenny's mind clicked into place. Maybe I can do my report on this bestiary instead, and add my own field observations, he said, slamming the book shut and shoving it into his worn leather book bag. I better get prepared. Dashing through the house, Kenny grabbed a pot, a pan, some rope, an old broom, and a garbage can lid. He strapped the blackened frying pan to his chest, using the rope and his belt. Placing the pot on his head, he rolled up the sleeves to his flannel shirt and grabbed the broom, the lid, and his book bag as he headed for the door. His mother and father were sitting in their rockers on the front porch. His dad was smoking his after-dinner pipe, while his mom was stitching a patch onto the knee of Kenny's trousers. Without looking up, she said, I'm glad those are play clothes you're in. Homework finished? Yes, Mom, Kenny replied, taking a lantern and hooking it to the handlebar on his bike. Be careful, Kenneth. I hope you know what you're doing, his father said. He sucked on his pipe and rocked slowly in his chair, watching the sun set. And tell that varmint not to eat any of my sheep. Kenny turned to his dad as he climbed onto his bicycle. I'll be fine, Pop. This is most likely an old world worm. They're cold-blooded, so they are very slow once the sun goes down. I can outrun him any old day, should it come to that. Either way, I aim to find out just who he is, where he came from, and what his intentions are. Don't be out too late, his dad replied, but Kenny had already sped out of sight.